Hey everyone, the good, the bad and the buggy here to show you some tips on how to play Endless Space 2. Now in this video I want to show you guys some ideas on how to have the strongest possible start to your game, because that's very important to put yourself in a commanding position when it comes to the mid to late game. Now the first thing I want to focus on is prioritization. This is probably the most important thing to get right in this game, because consistently poor prioritization through the start of the game will see you floundering and at best average in mid to late game. Now the first thing you need to prioritize is your technology research. Now I'm not going to go too in depth into this because it really depends on what race you're playing as and what playstyle you're going for which technologies you should pick, but some general advice is before picking your technology research, you should make sure you've had a good look at your race, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and what really applies to them. Pick the technologies that really are going to benefit you a lot in the short to long term, and actively avoid any technologies which give you little to no benefit, as this will waste time that you could definitely spend picking and researching much better technologies. The next thing you need to prioritize well are your resources. Now, while throughout the game you will get random events that allow you to gain more resources temporarily for little to no cost, the vast majority of your increased resource gain will come from either system improvements or from laws, both of which will usually cost some form of upkeep and also cost time in terms of system improvements. So it's important to know which resources you should focus on. When you're first developing a system, food should be your joint highest priority alongside industry, as it's important to get all the population you need to get as much out of the system as you possibly can. However, once you're generating enough food that you can add a new population to the system within a couple of turns, then it's usually better to lay off on constructing any new food improvements and focus more on other resources. Now, industry is probably the most important resource in the game, and you should treat it as such. If there's a new industry improvement available for building, you should almost always build it as soon as you can. One of the few exceptions to this rule is if the industry generation of your system is already so high that you can build most of your improvements in a few turns anyway, then you can probably afford to focus your time and efforts elsewhere. The importance of dust to your game is largely dependent on the race you're playing as and the style of play you're going for, as well as how lucky you are with the systems you colonize. If you find yourself in a position where you can gain a lot of dust from your systems, then you should absolutely take advantage of this and try to build improvements for gaining even more dust as soon as you can. With the right technologies, the dust you gain can give your empire a real boost, such as using it to speed up construction or buying materials you need from the marketplace. If it doesn't look like you're going to get all that much dust from your systems, you should still spare some time so you can build dust improvements, as dust is still useful for making sure your empire doesn't go bankrupt and for quickly colonizing new systems. Generally speaking, science should be prioritized above dust production, the exceptions being for certain races or playstyles and in the event that you find yourself losing dust. Science is probably the standout resource in that it never loses importance and you can always do with more of it in order to get to that next technology to make your empire even better. So assuming that you aren't lacking in food or industry, you should always make the effort to get more science. Now, as for influence, the importance of this resource depends entirely on your race and playstyle. There are some cases where you can safely ignore this resource altogether during your playthrough. However, opportunities to improve your influence gain are generally few and far between, so you may find yourself grabbing all those opportunities anyway. Regardless, I would consider influence to be the least important resource, except in a few specific circumstances. The next thing I want to talk about is system construction. Now, if you listened to what I just said about resources and their importance, you should already have a fair idea of which system improvements you should focus on over others, but there are a couple of points I'd like to make about when you should avoid constructing certain improvements. When you're looking at a system improvement you might want to construct, the first thing you should check is how much dust the system in question is actually outputting, and try not to put that system into negative output through building upkeep. While it is possible to offset any dust you lose on one system with dust gained from another, I find making sure that none of your systems lose dust even if this means not building some improvements, allows you to control a larger empire with greater ease without the risk of losing track of where your dust is going. Another thing you should check is whether the system improvement is actually giving you something you want. While all the system improvements do have some kind of benefit, some of them will simply not be worth the effort or the upkeep. For instance, the improvement may increase the generation of a resource that you already are generating more than enough of, or the improvement may be so minuscule that the time for construction would just be better spent doing something else with constructing something else in that system. Next thing I want to talk about is colonization. Now, you should always make a point of colonizing at least one new system right throughout the game. If possible, you should try to aim for one that will provide the most resources. However, don't waste too much time looking all over the constellation for the perfect system. Generally speaking, if you can colonize it and it's close by, it'll do. The only times you shouldn't be colonizing a new system is if you're already colonizing as many new systems as you can manage without compromising the growth in another system. Colonizing works by taking growth from another system, so if you're already taking too much growth from the same system, you'll end up losing pops in that system. The other time you should consider not colonizing new systems is if you've already hit the expansion disapproval cap, and any further colonizations will leave you in danger of losing resources across multiple systems because of a lack of happiness. Even if you've found the perfect system to colonize, the loss of resources from multiple systems due to losing your happiness buffs or gaining a happiness debuff will hit far harder than ignoring the system in question. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is combat. There isn't really much to say here that isn't already covered well by in-game tutorials. However, I will say that you shouldn't worry too much about redesigning or reorganizing your ships every time a new enemy comes along with a different weapon type in the early game, because at this point it's really more about either outnumbering your opponents or beating them in the rock, paper, scissors-ish mini-game that is the battle tactics system. And that's everything. I hope you found at least some of these tips and ideas helpful. If you're looking for a bit more help, we are planning on releasing new videos tied to each specific race in the game, so keep an eye on our channel for those videos. We're planning on releasing them soon if they're not out already. Thanks for watching, guys, and go take over that galaxy.